Welcome, ESC TV. This is Martin Halle. I'm president of the European Association of Preventive Cardiology, and it's my pleasure to have Professor Schunkert from Munich, Germany, here with me. He received the Geoffrey Rose Lecture Award today, so congratulations.
Thank you.
And we would like to chat on the topic you're doing research-wise, and you're head of cardiology at the German Heart Center in Munich. And when did you start off being interested in genetics, cardiovascular disease?
Yeah, so my training was in molecular biology. At that time, we talk about the early 90s. Gene expression, mRNA studies were very popular to understand which tissues express which kind of genes and thereby affect function of these various organs. We came across the angiotensin converting enzyme to be expressed in the heart, and we observed that with left ventricular hypertrophy there is more expression of ACE in the heart, and we also saw that this increased expression has some effect on the physiology of the heart. So I wanted then to study this in human. Of course, it's very difficult to get human tissue, although we got some and saw that also human hearts express ACE locally. But we came to the idea that it may be better to use genetic tools to study the function of genes. We didn't have the term Mendelian randomization at that time, but we did something very similar. We looked at a variant in the ACE gene and saw that this variant associates with increased hypertrophy of the heart, and that brought me into genetics as a tool.
So that was the link between basic research and then genetics, clinical application.
Right. We used genetics as a tool. And from then on, I understood, I mean, it may be very valuable to go further, but I changed from hypertrophy to myocardial infarction because that is a more prevalent disease, and we wanted to study the genes that cause coronary artery disease.
So did you expect at that time that this field of genetics would evolve in the way it has in cardiology over the last 5 to 10 years?
Well, the early days were the days of frustration, I must say. We did candidate gene studies that ended up to be poorly reproducible. So we got actually very bad press about, I mean, the observations that seemed to be exciting but were not really well reproducible. And the life changed with the event of the genome-wide association studies. But for 10 years, we had to go through many frustrations until actually with the methodological changes and advancements, we got real findings that were reproducible and actually meant something.
So it is not always going straight ahead and up the hill.
No.
So there is always for a researcher.
It was 10 years in the desert.
10 years. So from today, what would you say the role of genes in cardiovascular disease and development? Like, if you do, what do you say to a young individual? You're a clinician. Like a 45-year-old, otherwise healthy, not obese, eating okay, doing some exercise, no smoking. So, and he experiences an acute myocardial infarction and asks you, why do I have this acute myocardial infarction?
Well, it's a multifactorial condition, and it's not exclusively explained by the conventional risk factors. They are important, but they wouldn't have no impact if there is not a genetic predisposition. We have frequently any sort of disorder only because there is a genetic predisposition for some sort of cancer, for coronary disease or atherosclerosis, and on top of this genetic predisposition, the risk factors do their harm. But sometimes the genetic predisposition is so strong that it doesn't need many risk factors to precipitate the disease. So it's working together, but it's on the foundation of a genetic risk that we all carry.
you outlined that it is not just one gene, but it's multiple genes that act together, and that the more inherited of these bad genes you have, the more cardiovascular disease you will, or the risk is high, and the highest the risk of developing cardiovascular disease. And so what's the relationship between the genes and the number of genes and the risk factors, hypertension, diabetes, and hypercholesterolemia?
Right. So I won't say genes, but risk alleles. So the genes are always the same, but we have different flavors of these genes, and they are called alleles. And interestingly, these alleles that make little changes in the gene, they are relatively frequent. That is, some of the risk alleles have a population frequency of 90%. That means basically all of us carry the risk allele, only a few don't. And because these risk alleles are so common, we all have a large number of these risk alleles. And the surprising thing is that these risk alleles act together in a multiplicative function. So they multiply their effects. And that means you can tolerate a considerable number of these risk alleles, but then all of a sudden, because they multiply each other, the risk goes up very sharply in an exponential function. And it's only a small difference in the number of risk alleles that make a huge difference in risk because of this exponential function. And on top of this, the risk factors also multiply the effects of the risk alleles, or vice versa. The risk alleles multiply the effects of the risk factors, and all merge together in an individual risk that is based on a cumulative function. And individual risk alleles are exchangeable, even risk factors are exchangeable. The only thing that matters is the total number of risk variants, genes, and risk factors that multiply each other.
Can we then, by a lifestyle intervention, for example, can we somehow modify this? Is this then, yes, I cannot do anything about my alleles, but I can do a lot on my risk factors, can do like pharmacological intervention, lifestyle intervention. So how much impact do I have myself on this?
So that is a very good question. So like 5 years ago, I would have said, well, poor you if you have many risk alleles. But the opposite is true. The more risk alleles one carries, the more one can do by treating the risk that is treatable. That is lowering LDL cholesterol, normalizing blood pressure, non-smoking, because the absolute effects of treatment of risk factors are by far larger in those who have many risk alleles. So you can do much better for yourself if you have many risk alleles because of this multiplicative function where you remove some of the factors.
So if we look into the future and look at, like we have optimized analyses of our alleles for cardiovascular events, and I know them, and then I can categorize myself into low, moderate, medium, and high risk. Is that then the future, that I do have these alleles, and development of more in-depth also cardiovascular risk analyses like Lp(a), LDL, small dense LDL particle for the lipids, or regarding diabetes also going into more functional aspects of vascular function, for example?
I guess you're touching upon a very interesting point. There are so many factors that all contribute to cardiovascular risk. It's a multifactorial disease that is very difficult for a physician to grasp the entire spectrum. So it needs some, augmented realization of all the different risk factors, artificial intelligence, if you want, really to get the full picture where all the different risk categories and risk factors, including the genetics, come together and give the physician and the patient a good idea on what the total risk is and what is best to do to lower the total risk.
So is it then that, that we analyze the blood, send it to some clinical chemistry analysis, AI will then tell us what kind of yeah, intervention is best for this individual. Is that the future in like preventive cardiology?
Yeah, but only after integrating all the clinical information. So it doesn't, it's not informative separately. If you just look at the genetics, it doesn't tell you much, but it tells you a lot more when you have the clinical information on risk factors and prior disease. So both act together, and to have the full integrated picture, perhaps take some augmented realization and visualization of risk and also treatment options. And here I see the future really to bring all the information together and to make the best use of the integrated information.
And there's another emerging field, Google, Amazon. What about them? They collect data on what we do, what we eat, how we behave, and our social behavior as well. So integrating that into this model, is this the future?
Well, ideally it should be in the academic world, and it should be in the public rather than the private sector. Because, I mean, this information is very private information, and I know many people are very freely sharing their most private health information with companies. But ideally, the public sector should build something independently and have people decide on where they want to build their trust on public or academic resources and advice givers, or companies which have some other agenda when they deal with your or my private data.
So is it something for the ESC to do, like have a European platform where this is then scientifically sound and based, and have all the people who are in this field of population science, genetics, clinical cardiology, preventive cardiology, then putting all their effort and all their expertise into that? Is that the future?
I would guess so. I mean, the most reliable source that we have for risk prediction from a European perspective is the SCORE2 that allows to integrate all the risk factors and also gives recommendations for treatment or lifestyle measures to lower risk. Ideally, this is like a core where we add on further information from genetics, from other risk factors that are not really used right now to address the total risk. But I could see there a core that is growing over time and give perhaps a more complete picture when it comes to risk assessment and risk modulation at the same time. Ideally, the ESC would be holding this tool in their hands and become even more visible in the public.
And data is power, so this is probably something ESC should really look into. So what are your next plans in research? What are the next years for you to come, and what would you like to achieve?
Right, in practical terms, I'm working hard on a position paper from the ESC Council for Genomic Medicine, where we really want to integrate genetic information for risk prediction. I'm facing some methodological challenges, some critical voices, and I'm looking forward to fruitful discussions, and hopefully we can build this tool together with the ESC.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for coming today to ESC TV, and congratulations again to the award, the Geoffrey Rose Lecture, and great to have had you here.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure, and I'm very humbled to receive the Geoffrey Rose Award Lecture. Thank you.